Namaste and good evening, everyone. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste.
We are happy to continue today part 3 on exploring Sanskrit. And today we will continue this theme with more exemplification on the Sanskrit, and we will be happy to receive more questions from you. So please, you may address your questions at our email ID integralstudies.in@gmail.com, or you may address your questions during our conversation in the chat box. We have a few comments, one from Om Namo Bhagavate. I'm sorry, but your interesting lectures are heavily disturbed by YouTube ads every 2 minutes since some days ago. And from Silvia Galuzzo, she's writing, yes, it has become impossible for me too to follow the lessons. There is advertising every 2 minutes. I'm sorry, but it has become impossible to follow. We have not enabled monetization on YouTube.
Yeah, that's my comment. Okay.
Okay.
So I wanted to just put this on record that we have not enabled monetization on YouTube here. So any advertisements that YouTube is putting is either specific to your country or specific to you and is not connected to the Integral Studies channel itself. This channel is completely free. There is no utilization of ads for any income or any such thing. Monetization is not enabled. So just so you know, if you have this problem, please try with a VPN, or what I would recommend is download the video using a free downloader. I've put a link for what I would recommend, 4K video downloader. It's a very high quality and completely free downloader, and you can download it offline, watch it later on your own, and then delete the file. That way you're free from the intrusion of ads. We can go to the next question.
We have a question from Emilienne. I would like to share with you what we have called in French la language des oiseaux, the language of the birds. This language was used by alchemists and cathedral builders to pass on messages in a coded way while using common words. An uninitiated will hear a sentence that will be completely ordinary. On the other hand, an uninitiated person will hear something completely different. A very interesting person to listen on YouTube is Patrick Burensteinas. He explains le grand oeuvre of the alchemist through this language. I hope I pronounced correctly. And here are some examples with simple words. Shall I read them?
Yes, I think so. You want me to do
My
that?
French is not that great.
In French, so for example, la mort, which means death, can also be split as l'âme or, that is soul outside, or persevere, perse, where, pierce towards, or universe can be universe, or maladi, which is sickness, can be mal-adi, badly spoken. So it's a play of how you split the words. You can continue with the question.
This can also be valid in English. To put it in Arthurian context and the quest for the Grail, good night, wake up. Knowing this language allows you to paste certain words in another way and to reveal a hidden and a deeper meaning.
Yes. So this is Emilien's observation that there is such a thing as the language of the birds, la langue des oiseaux in French. And it is related to the alchemists and cathedral builders who had to hide from the church, as you know. But also, as happens in most mystical traditions, there is an attempt to hide knowledge and use double meaning of languages. But you will see from the examples that he has given also that you cannot have too many words in this way. It's as if the language is not supportive of this kind of double use or splitting words in complex ways. The language itself makes it very difficult, and you're lucky if you find words which can be used in this way. These types of groups of phrases or groups of words are also used today in NLP and in advertising industry as a way of subliminally influencing the listeners. So they will use words which as part of the sentence seem to be legitimate, but there is a subtle pause in between the word to split it in a way that a completely different word is activated in your mind or in your subconscious, and you are not conscious of it. So, for example, by the way, if you had to say by the way, and you pause, by the way. And so the idea is that this is touching the subconscious or subliminal at some level. So, fly by Dubai was one of the ads they used for a long time. Of course, it's evident, and yet it acts subliminally. So, there are things like this, but if you look at the nature of the language, whether it is French, English, or even if you go up to Latin, the patterns are almost arbitrary. You're lucky if you find them. You have to actually look for opportunities for double meaning, for punning, for innuendo. Unlike Sanskrit, where you could literally take any sentence, split it, or any word, and split it anywhere, and you would have a meaning. But unlike here, which is a artificially constructed language, as most of the modern languages are, if you split, the meaning does not fundamentally change. So, for example, if you take good night, and instead of good night, you make good night, night as in knight in shining armor, the meaning is completely different. But in Sanskrit, if you were to split, it would not change the meaning, because the root sounds still retain their sense. So, there's something very interesting, and I wanted to take this example from Emilian, both to show the benefits and advantages as well as the significant differences between the root languages versus the mentally constructed languages. We find there's a phrase, a word which is derived from Greek, polysemous, meaning words which make multiple meaning. So the polysemous words in English or French or all the derived languages, modern rational languages, they don't have any rational basis for this wordplay, and so there is no way that you can actually communicate a message deliberately. I want to also distinguish this from what is called the twilight language, which exists also in Europe. It also exists inside the both the Freemasons as well as the alchemists. In the twilight language, which is different from language of the birds, you have the double meaning which is done through symbolism. When, for example, they will speak of the gold which is made out of mercury and the mixing of different materials to create the philosopher's stone, each material, for example, mercury or sulfur, is representing some other, sometimes psychological principle, sometimes spiritual principle, while at the same time also perhaps representing a physical object. And so when you mix, when you process sulfur or you process mercury, you're actually dealing with perhaps the feminine principle or the masculine energies or vital energies of a particular kind, which you process, and the processing actually describes what you do psychologically, etc. We find this twilight language extensively used in the tantras also. But both of these tendencies across languages point to an innate tendency or need at the origin of language itself. And it was this that Sri Aurobindo pointed to in the passage we read last time. And if you find in the Veda that all the time there is this double meaning or even a triple meaning, there must be something inherent to the language itself. And so we go back to the nature of Sanskrit, and some of which is reflected in all of the ancient languages of the world. But none holds it as completely, as perfectly, as beautifully, as freely as the Sanskrit language, because it is closest to the original language of the gods. We come to the last question. Alina is there? No. So, Kalpesh has written, as Sri Aurobindo writes, the structure we find in Sanskrit is one of extraordinary initial simplicity and also of extraordinary scientific regularity of formation. He has quoted from Sri Aurobindo. So there's an extraordinary initial simplicity. Now, what does that mean? When you go to the simplicity, the basis of the language itself, the basis that you get is something so simple, so natural, so obvious, and a core pattern is repeated then through layers and layers and layers. The same pattern is repeated, which makes for the extraordinary complexity that's possible and the fluidity at the same time. So in one of the commentaries, maybe we will read part of that today, Sri Aurobindo observes that this is how the universe is built. at the root are some fundamental principles, and then those are repeated through layers and with variations. You will notice this is what the modern science recognizes when it says that the universe is inherently fractal. So you have a basic, so to say, symbolic pattern, and that's repeated. But that's a very crude geometric way of representing what is the more essential truth. Or the other way of looking at it is more truly, the universe is holographic. That means each part, so to say, represents the whole. But actually it's the other way around. From those essential principles, the whole is expressed. So extraordinary initial simplicity, but also extraordinary scientific regularity of formation. This is Sri Aurobindo's words. Then Kalpesh writes, if you look at the Sanskrit chart I am sending, it clarifies and proves Sri Aurobindo's observation. So I will place for you this chart to see, and it's quite fascinating. If I may look at Kalpesh's chart, let's see. So there's an article which Kalpesh had written, which also he has sent, and I have made this downloadable. So for those of you who are interested, you can look at the download. The link is given, but I will share here a chart which has the Sanskrit alphabet laid out. Let's take a look at this now. And I think this should be now visible. It's just the overall structure of the language, and I will come to this shortly. So what Kalpesh says is that in the present day international framing of sound, and it's an international convention, the classification of sounds of consonants, for example, is done by manner of articulation, whether it is fricative, explosive, affricative, or the place of articulation, where is the contact point, or whether it is done with vibrations of the cord, etc. But this is an artificial construct. You just observe some characteristics, you combine them, and then build some kind of a table. Sanskrit is not like that. Sanskrit is inherently, in the structure of the alphabet itself, holding this framework. So what you will see here in this, maybe, let me see if I can enable the pen annotation. So what you see here, first are the vowels. They're all put together. And let me change the annotation pen if I can. Not happening. Yes. So, and then you have the consonants. The whole group of consonants is here below. And the separation of vowels and consonants is also interesting. Why do you need to separate them? Look at the English language, for example, which goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. Vowels, consonants are just mixed up. Why? That's how it is. That's how you were taught. Why is it that you have these A, B, C, D in that particular sequence? So let's take a moment to just dwell on this question. Why is it A is followed by B and then C and D? Oh, it goes back to the Greek. Why do the Greek have it? It goes back perhaps to some Sumerian or other tradition. Why do they have it like that? No logic. It's arbitrary. Or perhaps, as I once read, there was a author called James Churchward who wanted to trace all of humanity back to land of Mu in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and he actually said that the whole alphabet narrates the story of Mu sinking, and he had a particular way of interpreting it. Maybe there's a point to it or not. The point though is, it is completely arbitrary. There is no structure, there is no logic, there is no meaning, there is no consistency, and this makes for the alphabet to be entirely meaningless. You just have to learn it by heart. Worse, each of the consonants is pronounced differently. So you pronounce B, C, D, but you don't say Phi for F, isn't it? You don't say He for H. You say H. F. You don't say eb or S or ed. You say B, C, D. Why? And you say P, you don't say key for Q. Q becomes Q and not pew. You see? There is no logic. It's entirely arbitrary. And so the problem is there is an arbitrary combination of vowels and consonants, arbitrary sequence, no meaning, no logic, no consistency. This then reflects itself in the structure of the language itself, where words are formed by combining arbitrarily vowels and consonants, and then the same word with the same spelling can have 2 different meanings or 4 different meanings depending on context, or 2 words with similar spelling are pronounced completely differently. So one of the classic examples given is the English word GHOTI. Now such a word doesn't actually exist, but I believe it was George Bernard Shaw who was trying to make a point of the arbitrariness of the English language. So GHOTI, ghoti, he said should be pronounced fish. So arbitrarily, you see, there's no relation between the sound fish with ghoti. And yet, and he explains how, the GH has to be pronounced the way you pronounce the word rough or tough. You write ROUGH, and the GH you pronounce as f. The O you pronounce in women. Women, the WO is pronounced as not woo, we. So O is pronounced as E. And then in any word ending with TION, nation for example, the TI is pronounced sh. So ghoti, GH becomes f, E, sh, fish. Very logical, isn't it? The strange part is, this makes for such confusion for initial learners, which makes all these languages difficult to learn because of this arbitrariness. When you read a word, and you might be very good at reading and writing a book without having heard the language, but the day you start speaking a language, you end up looking like a fool because you will pronounce words wrongly. In fact, one of the common things we had as children, our elders in India, often grandparents, would pronounce the word pronunciation, and we had been told in school it's pronunciation. So we would laugh, oh, you see, they don't know. But how would they know? How would anyone know? And even you're being told in your school by somebody that they say pronunciation, go back 50 years, perhaps it was totally different. At the time of Shakespeare, the same words that you pronounce today would have been completely different in pronunciation. Many of the things today which are swallowed, unsounded, would have been different. And the same with French or most other languages. So this is to show total arbitrariness. And I want to contrast this with how Sanskrit is structured. And we'll look at this picture again. I'm going to put it on the screen. Okay, so, and I will use the pen to draw. Yes. So we have the vowels first. They're separated from the consonants. Now, why are vowels separated from consonants? Very simply, because vowels are sounds that you can make without any movement of your vocal structure. A, I, U, R, A, etc. It's just air flowing. Consonants require something to close and open or move. Structurally though, in the sound, the word used in Sanskrit is swara. Swara is vowels, and consonants are described as the unmoving, immovable. So the immovable sounds are the things which are fixed, and you need to separate the moving ones from the fixed. We'll come to that shortly and see the importance of this. Because remember, all this goes back to the essential roots. So here is the first series of vowels. K, K, G, G, Ng. Second sequence, ch, ch, j, jh, na. For those of you who are already familiar with Sanskrit or even Hindi or most of the Indian languages, it's not surprising. But let's keep our patience for those who may not have seen this before, who are not familiar with the Indian languages. So the third set of vowels is t, th, d, dh, na. Then next set t, th, d, dh, na. Then p, p, b, bh, m. Now if you look at this in sequence, observe what's happening inside your mouth. The first set you did by placing your tongue pushing at the back of the throat. So these are called guttural sounds. Kantha, that is throated sounds. K, k, g, g, g. Notice there's a contact point taking place at the base of the throat here. The next step, ch, touches the palate. So it's as if one step forward. Ch, ch, j, j, ñ. Nothing else moves. Then third one is where you're touching the top of the mouth. So cerebral. T, th, d, dh, na. Next step, your tongue is touching your teeth. T, th, d, dh, na. So they're dentals. And the last one is a series which involves only the lips, closing, opening. P, p, b, bh, m. Fascinating, isn't it? So the entire alphabet as if flows from the depth of the gorge towards the surface, towards the lips. There's more. There's more which comes afterwards, which are semi-vowels and sibilants. We will look at those separately. But just look at these set of five sounds. Ka, kha, ga, gha, nga, cha, cha, ja, 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 ta, tha, da, dha, na, pa, pa, ba, bha, ma, ta, tha, da, dha, na, pa, pa, ba, bha, ma. 5 steps coming outward. Now observe, it is following naturally the creative process, something which is seated deep within you, rising out and then flowing out through 5 steps. And each of those 5 steps, there are 5 variations. Now what are these variations? So you'll notice, let's look at this first vertically. What are they? Now observe how the sound moves from the depth of the throat to your lips. K, ch, t, t, p. K, ch, t, t, p. The second column is taking the same thing but with force of h added. K, ch, t, t, p. The third column is softer but of the same type. G, j, d, 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 b. Not as harsh, softer. And you'll notice all these have to do with quality of force. And the fourth column is the same with force, h sound added. G, j, d, d, b. Interesting, isn't it? So you see here a natural structure of sounds matching the structure of your throat, but also matching the innate qualitative characteristics of the sound. There is one more series which comes just after, which is here placed as variations that come from the nose now kicking in. So far the nose was nowhere in the picture. When the nose kicks in, the same thing acquires a nasal character. Nya, nya, na, na, ma. So you're going from the back to the front, but now with the nose participating. And notice, horizontally, it matches the row that you are on. So, k, ch, k, kh, g, gh, ng. Only the nose activates. Now, if you had to do a n sound followed by k, what would it be? Ink. You can't say imk. You can't put an m before k. Try it out. Try to speak the word ink with m replacing the n. You can't. You just simply can't. Before the k, there has to be the nasalization, which is close enough to the k so that you can make the sound. That's the ng. Ink, ing, doing, ng. In the English language, all these are replaced by one letter n, n. The letter n takes place for 6 or 7 different nasalities and variations of nasality, depending on context, and you have no way to know which one it is. You also lose in the process the innate power of the sound itself, and we will come to that shortly. When you look at the ch now, the second set, ch, ch, j, j, ny, ch. If you had to put n before ch, that's the sound. T, t, d, d, n. It's not difficult. Just put the n before the sound t. Pint. That's your n. You see, an English speaker has never even thought of these as different sounds. Because it's somehow, you're used to it, you never even notice that there's a different sound being used. Same with p, p, b, bh, m. You put the m sound or n sound before p, imp. You can't do in, p. You can't do an n followed by p. You have to put an m before. Mp, imp, imb. So you have here, interestingly now, 5 sounds with the nose nasality included in a row of 5, columns of 5. Now the moment you see 5 and 2 sets of 5, it suggests something to you. Remember, we have 5 fingers. We are counting 10 because of 2 hands. What would you do? Obviously, you would associate a number with these, isn't it? So what would be the numerical sequence? You would go vertically. K, t, p. K, ch, t, t, p. Or you could go horizontally, arbitrarily. But the natural sequence is the first 5 and then the third 5. The result is you could take any sentence, ignoring vowels because the vowels are moving, they are not stable, fixed sounds, so they don't need to have numbers. You could take any sentence and replace the consonants by equivalent numbers. Now this is something which seems so odd. Why would you reduce a sentence to a number? The interesting thing is, because Sanskrit is root sound based, each sound having a meaning, you can even go the other way. You can take a number and convert it into a sentence or sounds. There you get the key, why you would want to go the other way. So this is something which we will see later. We will see a few examples of the extraordinary character of the Sanskrit language. There is actually a prayer in Sanskrit which is made of 32 syllables. You start reading from the first to the last, and it's a prayer to Vishnu. You read backward the same syllables in reverse, it's a prayer to Shiva. You convert each syllable to its equivalent number, and you will end up with pi, the ratio of the circle's perimeter to diameter, to the 32nd decimal place, or 31st decimal place if you count the 3. Isn't that amazing? Of the intellect that could formulate first a sentence that is perfectly a prayer one way, and in reverse with 32 characters makes a complete different prayer addressed to Shiva, and at the same time can be reduced to a number structure, and you have coded pi. If you think of it as a mnemonic only, you say, that's an easy way to remember pi digits. But they are not interested in that. Rather, what they are trying to see is inherent to the number pi is the relationship with the divine. What they did was they took pi, converted it into the sentence. Remember, because our focus is on consonants for numbering, the vowels are freely added. You can make any variation of vowels. And the result is you can construct a meaningful sentence. But what you discover, and perhaps by the correct play of vowels, you create, and that would be the genius of the person, at the same time in reverse a prayer to Shiva. So the attempt is actually to draw out inherent divinity out of a special, extraordinary, non-representable number. We have spoken about this relatively recently, so I don't repeat. I'm not sure if it was in this series or somewhere else. So the pi represents a number which is called transcendental. It cannot be represented as a ratio of 2 numbers. There is no way to physically represent pi in a finite representation, except by arbitrary association. You make this letter pi. Otherwise, the number itself, 3.141569, etc., goes on unendingly, infinitely, never repeating a pattern. You just chop the first 32 decimal places and you find divinity, and you evoke, express that divinity. But it's not one way, it goes the other way, because Shiva and Vishnu are, so to say, complementing each other. Even in the name Vishnu, Va, Shiva, Shava, they are as if complementing each other. And so a prayer which goes this way must be a prayer in the other way to Shiva, isn't it? Interesting idea. So you recognize first the genius of the creator, but you also recognize a language which is flexible enough to be able to be adapted to such use. This emerges naturally from the fact that the structure of the alphabet and its consonants in this case that we saw follows the structure of the throat, but we will come to this from a still deeper perspective. Ask yourself this question: if you could design a throat of any shape, and arbitrarily, absolutely any shape, you are now in place of the divine creator, you can conceive of any creature, make one. And you have now a mechanism to make a sound. Or let's say you're going to construct an artificial AI machine with an ability to voice, and we don't want it to speak human language. We want it to be able to make any language that you can conceive of, any sound that you can conceive of. What would be the mechanism? So inherently to any production of language by any creature anywhere in the universe, there would be three components. The first component would be a vibratory basis which would make the air move. The second component, which must follow the first, you can't change their sequence. This is universal truth. The second component will be modifying by shape. Nasality would be one of the factors, but modifying by the movement of the tongue in this case, or by the cheeks, or a combination of such, but modifying by shape by any means. And the third component, and you cannot avoid this, will be something which closes the sound or opens it. And therefore the power to close and the power to open would have to be there in some mechanism, some way. Just as you have eyelids, you have to close, open. Well, sound, you will have to have something to close and open. Now these three things in sequence, you cannot change their sequence. You cannot put the opening, closing at the back. It just doesn't work there. There is a natural sequence: sound generation by vibration, resonance and modification of resonance, and then the third will be the closing and opening. Now the moment you have these three steps, you have effectively the Sanskrit alphabet structure. Now I have a problem with the word alphabet, because in the English language the word alphabet in its etymology comes from the first two letters. Alpha, beta actually comes from Greek, alpha, beta, gamma, so alphabet. It's like saying ABCD. Do you know your ABCD? Do you know alphabet? That's what it means. Sanskrit is not alphabet. Isn't it? Because it's not going alpha, beta, gamma. Sanskrit is not alphabet. So we should not use the word Sanskrit alphabet. What would you use? And what does Sanskrit use? I'm coming back to Kalpesh's email. So he is describing the structure of the 5 lines. I'm not reading out the whole text, but well, maybe I'll read. When arranged, they are grouped vertically. Hard sounds first column, hard plus aspirate second column, soft sounds third column, soft plus aspirate fourth column, nasal sound fifth column. And first 2 columns require high intraoral pressure. You see, Dr. Kalpesh is a plastic surgeon. He's working with the human body. So he's looking at high intraoral pressure. They are voiceless without vocal cord vibrations. Second columns require lesser intraoral pressure with vocal cord vibrations. Fifth column requires minimum intraoral pressure with vocal cord vibrations. And then what you saw below, glides and sibilants are grouped separately, and both are again arranged in a back to front manner. All sounds in the Sanskrit language are arranged in structure which matches vocal cord, or I will say vocal cord structure, if you had to design one, would match this sound structure, because it seems as if the way you can create any number of sounds would inherently boil down to this structure of Sanskrit. So Kalpesh concludes his note: no language in the world provides such a scientific arrangement of sound as Sanskrit language. And he ends his letter with, with gratitude at the lotus feet of Sri Aurobindo, who enlightened my mind as to the secret of the science of Sanskrit Varnamala. Varnamala is the equivalent word for alphabet. So we'll come to this shortly. But I have put the link to a paper which was written by Kalpesh as a doctor. I'm not putting the full name, you will find in the paper itself. And as a plastic surgeon, one of the problems you find is sometimes children have birth defects, sometimes there is injury from an accident. How do you detect what is the mechanism which is damaged and what is the corrective surgery needed? And in the way it is conventionally done, it is extremely difficult because there is an arbitrary array of sounds. The people are asked to pronounce the sounds, then you observe and try to detect. So Dr. Kalpesh's paper actually uses the Sanskrit structure. You have the person pronounce the Sanskrit alphabet. You mark where the defects are or where a letter has been pushed to the next line or next row or next column. And that distortion of the sound in the placement of the letter is an exact representation of the distortion of the biological damage. What do you do for correction? You do there what you need to do here. Or you observe what you need to do here and then you intervene surgically to do there. Amazing, isn't it? And I believe the paper won some special exceptional award. So now, this was just a demonstration of a statement Sri Aurobindo makes, but it's a demonstration which is still just preliminary. We're going to look at a few more aspects to this language. So as I said, it's not an alphabet. What is it? The word Kalpesh has used is the Sanskrit Varnamala. Again, if you look at the word Varnamala, and as you will see in the translation everywhere when people comment on it, they will say Varna means colors, Mala is garland, so garland of colors. I say no, unfortunately that's not quite correct. What is it actually? Varna, recall, is exactly the same word used for the 4 Varnas which unfortunately the British converted to 2000 castes. So when you speak of 4 Varnas, those who are oriented to knowledge, strength, growth and perfection in skill, being 4 types of soul powers which are inherent to all of us. One of them may dominate in our nature. That was 4 Varnas, Chatur Varna, which they turned into castes and made a social division artificially to pit the Indian people against each other and to create all kinds of divisions in society. Let's set aside for a moment. But Varna is unfortunately translated as color. So I was sitting once with somebody who happened to be a hardcore leftist, and she made some comment and I said, no, but that's not how it is. Varna means colors of society, meaning the variations of qualities of types. And she says, yes, exactly, skin colors of society. So the Brahmins were the fair ones and the rest were in sequence darker in skin. And I was so shocked because in my entire thinking, never had this idea come in, because when you grow up with the Sanskrit language, you're thinking with the Sanskrit words, you think Varna and it has a very different flavor. It's not skin color. But she had grown up in English in a leftist education, and for her Varna meant skin color. So I went deeper to this because now the whole goal is to go back all the way to the root. What is Varna? From where does it come? Remember the Vrika, the terror? Sri Aurobindo gave that example. Vrika and Vra, Vara, Vra, coming back to the same root as Varna. So what is Varna really? The Vra is the movement of separation into multiplicity of variations. And I would suggest, I don't know, I have not done this study, so please don't blame me if it is wrong. I would suggest even the word variation, Vra, Vara, if you go back through the Latin root, might come back to the same root as Varna. So in fact, colors are also referred to by Varna because they represent the spectrum of variations. But Varna represents variations. But it's not enough. There's also the Varna. And inherently the sense of Varna, when you dwell on the sense of the root sounds, is the fullness of the spectrum of variations. There is implicit to the idea not just variations, but variations which are fully included. So when you say varna, where it is varna as psychological or soul qualities, or whether you use in this case varna mala, garland, so even we'll look at the mala perhaps, but varna mala, it means the completeness of the variations of all possible sounds. So it is not an alphabet, it is a varna mala. Now mala, I do not know the etymology. As I said, I wish my appreciation of Sanskrit was much deeper, but I do know that it is nominally or representatively the word is used to describe the garland. What is specific about the garland? There is no beginning, there is no end, there is only a continuum of rotation, isn't it? But the whole is a closed loop. It is not hanging from one end to the other arbitrarily somewhere. So Varnamala to me evokes the sense of this full spectrum of possible sounds, but held in a closed, contained loop or wholeness. Why is this important? I'm coming again to the question of the word etymology, even of the word Sanskrit. Almost every commentator in modern times repeat what they've heard, what they've read. Sanskrit. Sanskrit, some is well Skriti formed, well formed, beautifully formed, perfectly formed, so perfect language. Everybody will comment like this. I've read that, and for some time I used to think that also because, well, you were taught that. But then when I started training myself to start thinking in terms of root sounds, I found that is not so. When you go to the sense of Sanskrit and it goes to Sam, Krit, we'll see, but Sam, what does it come to? It has nothing to do with just beauty or good formation, perfect form. No, it's not that. Some has the particular sense of the fullness, inclusiveness. You look at this word, samyama, which is a gathered concentration where everything is gathered. But there's another word which Aurobindo uses, samgyanam. It's a Vedic term which is used to describe the supramental knowing at its highest function. So there are several gradations of its functioning. The upper, highest, which is oneness including all multiplicity under its oneness, is samgyana. So jnanam being knowledge. The sam is this encompassing, whole containing sense. Now come back to the sense of Varnamala, the dividing movement but contained and held in a whole, the full multiplicity of sound range possible to any creating mechanism which makes sound. Any, irrespective of specifics. Or to put it another way, anywhere you go in the universe, any creature that makes sound will be either this full or a subset of this. There can be no other essential sounds, or all other sounds will be combinations of these, variations on these. Now remember, the consonants as they are written, the word used for consonant is, again, if you look at consonant or vowel, if you go to the etymology, it's not obvious why they are called this. But when you go to the Sanskrit etymology of consonant, it is akshara. Kshara is moving, akshara immoving, immovable, fixed, rigid. What you see in the script of Sanskrit is the focus is on the consonants. Vowels do not have independent forms of their own, except when they stand separately, they are given a special form. So you'll have to, if you had just the sound you would put it separately. But if you had the would combine with the and would be at the center of it. So you have a bar which makes the You have a double bar to make A. You make a little loop above to make E. You make a loop backward or forward to make the E long or short. You make U by a loop below, again backward or forward to make it long or short. You put a dot above to make a but the is akshara, immovable, unmoving. The vowels dance around it like little floral variations around that which is immovable. So again, I come back to the structure of the alphabet as Varnamala, as we just saw it. And you notice there the natural place of the consonants. Group of 5 into 5. Now, this is extremely important because this matches the structure of any sound producing mechanism, whether it be by the human vocal cords or animals or birds or extraterrestrials from anywhere. The difference will be depending on animals, birds, or others. Some of these might get restricted. For example, certain creatures might be unable to express clearly certain rows, or they would be weak on certain columns, or the nasality of it might not be strong enough, or etc. Or the rigidity of the mouth structure would prevent some things. Or notice the structure sound wise. Two sounds which are similar and produced similarly would be neighbors to each other. So t and th, it's obvious. T and d is obvious. But from t to th is also neighbor. D to d is a neighbor vertically, horizontally. They are neighbors. But notice there is also diagonal neighborhood. T to d. It's not so clear. They are farther apart physically in the placement, but they are also farther apart in sound, and yet they are neighbors. Why is this important? Now you observe how people pronounce, go across different linguistic groups within India, and you notice something interesting. There is a distortion either horizontally or vertically. Either sounds move horizontally forward or backward, or vertically forward and backward. Very rarely diagonally, but that also happens. So, and the same with vowels. A could become a combination of with O or O. P would become mixed with B. You'll see this very often in Tamil. P and B will be mixed because the letter written is exactly the same, and it's by repetition of the letter that you make it P or B. Interesting. Similarly with T and D. It's as if in the Tamil language there is the memory that they belong to the same group, they are produced by the same means, so you use the same letter, but by repetition you highlight this or that. So inherently in the Tamil speech, or people who are used to that, there's a tendency to blur between the first column and the third column. K will become G, G will become K sometimes, Ch and J, T and D, etc. Or if you go in Bengali, for many people the B tends to acquire greater prominence. There's as if a tendency to take the Sanskrit P and tend to push it towards the B. If you go to Gujarat, for example, there'll be again certain distortions which often have to do with vowels and sometimes with certain consonants. I had once tried to make a chart around this. I don't remember now where I have it. But you could do a very easy, quick arrangement of this, and you will notice practically the shift follows the pattern of this structure. Now I extended this also to European languages. So when I go to France, I notice particularly certain variations, certain blurrings of sounds, and I notice this. So for example, from the vowels, E and A. So E and A in French are very difficult for people to express, because in French, the E has been reduced to E with a specific projection of the jaw forward and the lips moving E. Un peu. Un peu. If you say P, that's not a distinguishable sound. E and A is not a distinguishable sound. A lot of European languages have this problem, which is the reason why you will see, if you are used to the Sanskrit pronunciation and you listen to singers in Europe or the United States who chant Sanskrit verses, they inevitably render the E as A. So, Agni Mire, they will say Agni Mire. So, I'm just trying to remember some verses. But E becoming A, to the Indian ear, it is painful. It's a severe distortion. But to those in whom the language allows this free exchange of A sounds, they don't even notice the difference. So I was actually sitting across trying to train someone who's born with the French language, and I said, pronounce A. And she said, I can't make out the difference. I said, can you make out and Yes, this I can. Which to the Indian ear, and is the same. Because we are used to everything coming back to the as the focal point. So there is a tendency within those who are familiar or used to the Sanskrit language to drift back to the pure sound of the alphabet. But interestingly, if you are trained in Sanskrit, if you have trained your tongue and mouth to be able to go across the entire spectrum, okay, so Varna Mala, Varna range, I would translate as a better equivalent idea would be the spectrum, the full spectrum of sounds. So if you're trained in the full spectrum of the Sanskrit Varna Mala, what is interesting is you have the flexibility to be able to move from any sound to any sound and change your accent to match any accent of any language in the world. It's very easy because your mouth is capable of it. But if you've grown up in a language where this matrix has been slightly distorted, and I'm pointing out the distortions are all topological, meaning they preserve neighborhoods. So it's like you take a paper and you shrink, drag this, or stretch to highlight some variation of distinction. That's all. But the structure has to stay same because that structure is universal for human beings as well as for all beings. So what is interesting here is, if someone grows up with a reduced range and blurring of certain sounds, they take a while to be able to distinguish and come to the full stretch of the vocal cords and the pattern of sound, cheek, tongue, etc. and lips. But once they come to that, they will find that they have now a greater flexibility to consciously adjust their accent very easily to any language. So this is just an observation about how universal, because so essential, this whole structuring is. And it matches human chords or any other vocal production chords. So all distortions are also seen here. And whether it is done for plastic surgery to make correction of a defect, or as a way for you to stretch your skill and plasticity of sound making ability, it's still the same idea. Now, there's one more thing we have seen. There are semi-vowels. After p, p, b, b, m, you have semi-vowels, y, r, l, v, and let me show you the picture again. Okay. So after the, let me see if I can annotate again. Yes. After the p, p, b, b, m, you have the semi-vowels y, r, l, v, and the sibilants, that is the s sound, s, sh, s, h. Now here again there are two sh and sh. So if you're not used to this distinction, you can't make out what I just did. I did sh and sh. So try this. Try to say Vishnu. Vishnu. The moment your sh drifts towards the n, the sh shifts into a sh. Vishnu. Srishti, the sh drifts towards the t. There are two different shs as they drift. Now it's possible that in some distant past they were still the sh. But because of the nature of the structure of the sound creating mechanism, the sh tends to split towards these two distinctions. And if it was found that there's a qualitative difference between the two, then the Sanskrit language would have retained or tried to retain it. And then finally, there are a few very specialized sounds. H, okay, we have got R. R is one of the sounds which is between L and D. And then there are combination sounds Sh and Ny. But those can be ignored. So now depending on who you talk to, they will see the total number of letters are 50 or 51 depending on how you categorize. But I saw one article which said they are actually 54, by adding some of these compound sounds which are common. And so 54, and each sound has a masculine and feminine side, so the combination makes for 108. It's pretty, it's convenient, but to me it was not convincing enough. But you see how one would want to play with the numbers, but in reality we come to something like 50 typically. Now I'm going to settle on 50 for a reason, and that reason comes to something even more astounding. This is a mapping of these sounds to something which is actually not physical at all. That's why I also said that the structure of our vocal cords is a representation of the sound themselves, which seem to have a universal reality. Okay, so how does this happen? And this happens in something so outstanding, so amazing as to be mind-blowing. And we're going to have one more thing which will also be mind-blowing. So first this mind-blowing, let's look at when you look at the human body. Oh, I don't know what. I'm going to wait. We'll now read something of Sri Aurobindo, then we'll come to this part. So let's now look at what Sri Aurobindo has to say about all this. So we have now appreciated something of the Sanskrit Varnamala. Poor rendering will be of the word alphabet, but Varnamala and this universality of the sound making apparatus and the structuring of the sounds. Now we come to a text of Sri Aurobindo, which is his commentary on the first lyric of the Rig Veda. He says, the Sanskrit language is the Deva Bhasha. Deva, divine is the translation, but you saw it is light being. So it is the luminous consciousness's speech of the luminous consciousness of the divine. So Sanskrit language is the Deva Bhasha, or original language spoken by men in Uttara Meru. And this whole story of Meru is the mountain, and it is supposed to be the origin of many things. We will skip that. At the beginning of the Manvantara is this grand cycle of evolution. But in its purity, it is not the Sanskrit of the Dwapara or the Kali, the Yuga. He's speaking of the Kali and the Dwapara Yuga. Remember, there are 4 Yugas. So the original language belongs to Satya, but it gets degraded. It is the language of the Satya Yuga based on the true and perfect relation of Vak and Artha. So there is a true and perfect relation of the sound, Vak and Artha meaning. So each sound has a natural meaning. Any meaning has an innate way of expressing itself in sound. And this, when it is identified, you have the perfect language, and that is the nature of the language in the golden age, the Satya Yuga. Now he explains this. Every one of its vowels and consonants has a particular and inalienable force, which exists by the nature of things and not by the development or human choice. So you observe, that's how it is. You can't look at how it's changed and so it has become this. That's how it is in the origin, in the essence. And it's not your choice. That's how it is in nature. Water extinguishes fire. Now, there's nothing you can do about it. That's the nature of the substance and the relationship, isn't it? It's on that level. These are the fundamental sounds which lie at the basis of the tantric bija mantras, seed sounds. Bija is seed, mantras, sound powers, so seed sounds. And we'll come to that in a maybe more detailed way next time. But for the moment, just keep this in mind. And constitute the efficacy of the mantra itself. So there's a vibrational quality implicit to the sound. Even if you don't know the meaning, there is a power activated. Then he says, every vowel and every consonant in the original language had certain primary meanings, which arose out of this essential Shakti or force, and were the basis of other derivative meanings. So you now combine and you build derivative meanings by chain, by sequencing of qualities. But still the first one will have the greater force, the second is a modifier, the third is a further modifier. So there's a secondary and tertiary roots. By combination with the vowels, the consonants, and without any combinations, the vowels themselves formed a number of primary roots. What those are, we will look at shortly. E, U would be just the vowels in themselves, or K, Ki, Ku would be the combination of consonant with vowel, or P, Pi, Pu, etc. Each of these, as we saw last time already, as if tilts or turns the meaning in one of 3 directions. These are primary roots, out of which secondary roots were developed by the addition of other consonants. So if you took K, Ki, Ku, you take K or Ki, and then you add one more consonant, and that becomes now secondary root. All words, no exceptions, all words were formed from these roots. Simple words by addition again of pure or mixed vowel and consonant terminations, with or without modification of the root, and more complex word by the principle of compositions. So now you add one more modifier and that becomes a basic simple word. Sometimes you modify the root to match the slant that you want to create. So for example, you say this object, but acquisition of this object or ownership of this object would be by a modification on the root, which brings in a different force or quality. This language, increasingly corrupted in sense and sound, becomes the later Sanskrit of the Treta, Dwapara and Kali Yuga. Now, if this is the origin of language, every sound has a meaning, every vowel, every consonant has a meaning, every combination actually has a meaning. Obviously, not all will survive, some will fade out. And then with the mentalization, all this which is almost held at an intuitive experiential level, as we saw last time, becomes more and more mentalized, therefore more and more fixed with idea. And that's what happens through the yogas. Why? Because the consciousness of people begins to live more and more superficially. When you live in a more intuitive consciousness, your speech holds the intuitive meaning of the word sounds. When you move out from that intuitive state into a mentalized state, the mental association of sound now begins to dominate what was a more fluid, flexible, intuitive sense. And we saw examples of that last time. So as a result, language shifts because your consciousness shifted. Understand the point, consciousness shifts, which causes language shift. Otherwise, language would not drift. Once you catch this, you come to two very important statements of Sri Aurobindo. They are not here. They are in the text which we read last time partially, where he says this change of language, we may call it evolution or involution more accurately, is dominated by two things: the physical principles of change and the psychological or mental principles of change. The physical principles are related to the speech, sounds and associated quality of the sound itself. The mental change comes from this shift of mind. There's a very interesting video. I will try to put it up for next time. It's a TED talk by Dr. Sampadanand Mishra, where he gives you, I think, 10 or 20 different words for water. Jala, for example. Water is jala. It is also apa. It is also many other. Each focuses on a certain quality of the water. So apa has a particular sense, if I get it right, is the spread, the spreading quality. You put a drop, it spreads. You pour it, it spreads. This sense of spreading out, if I'm right. Well, it could be also related to the flow. I'm a little confused there. But jala very clearly comes from the root of ja. Ja is jayate, birth, that which gives birth. As the basis of all movement of coming into being, of life, of birth, etc. There are other terms of water which relate to its characteristic, as if life energy, as if nourishing, as if whatever other qualities you may have. Now, why is this important? Because depending on the context of the people and their utilization of the water, the particular quality of association and the word formed for that would tend to take place of association and get fixed with the word water. If you were in a desert, water would be the life-giving substance and that word would dominate. If you were in a tropical area with lots of rivers flowing, then perhaps the flowing movement would dominate. And so the word with which you would finally associate an object with the sound would largely depend on psychological and other historical circumstances. So this language, increasingly corrupted in sense and sound, becomes the later Sanskrit. Being sometimes partly purified and again corrupted and again partly purified, so that it never loses all apparent relation to its original form and structure. So innately, if the language is holding something deeper, there'll be tendencies to bring it back to its roots and again lose and again bring back and again lose. Now, I observe this, for example, in the English language. There are many words which have long ago lost their roots. But when you have 2 or 3 words now for a particular utility, we tend to go to the word which has the greater quality of force that matches the quality that you want to express. For example, you use the word harsh in English. This is so harsh. Notice this, I think the word is onomatopoeic. The sound quality conveys the sense of this. It's harsh, crushing, rough, crude, painful even in hearing. Soft, gentle. I had at one point, I don't remember who it was an author who had this ability to bring certain kinds of, his vocabulary would shift to catch certain sounds, to evoke certain moods in the English language. That was quite remarkable. And because you come from a certain background of Sanskrit, you recognized immediately, he's got a whole paragraph which is full of the soft sounds. And he's trying to create a romantic or sensual mood with those sounds. And there was nowhere any sound which had this harsh t, t, p. They were as if softened out or removed. So the tendency will be always to come back to the innate quality that resonates in the sound itself. And so the corrective means does not mean you need to understand the roots. It happens by itself. And then again it perverts over time. So, he continues, every other language, however remote, is a corruption formed by detrition and perversion of the original language into a prakrit. Prakrit means now distorted or corrupted version of the pure Sanskrit, or the prakrit of a prakrit, and so on to increasing stages of impurity. The superior purity of the Indian language is the reason of its being called the Sanskrit. Because this, what we call modern Sanskrit, retains or is closest still to that. And not given any local name. So Sanskrit, you could say well formed, but I've given you perhaps what to me seems more true from the roots perspective, that there is this completeness, wholeness to it. Now, this is an exceptional statement he's making now. The superior purity of the Indian language is the reason of its being called the Sanskrit and not given any local name, its basis being universal and eternal. Now, Sri Aurobindo is telling you this, that this is universal. Across planets, across creatures, across any being that lives anywhere, it would be this tendency. And eternal. It will be the same 1 billion years ago and 10 billion years hence. Because these are going to essential, real roots. And, Sri Aurobindo says, it is always a rediscovery of the Sanskrit tongue as the primary language that prepares first for a true understanding of human language, and secondly for a fresh purification of Sanskrit itself. So I believe we are at a very early, crude stage of this kind of a revival. Maybe another 50 years, Sanskrit will be almost well known and more commonly known perhaps at least, and with that will come the deeper understanding of the root structures, and automatically there will be a drift towards the innate purity of the root sounds. It's inevitable. Now this was a passage taken in the middle of his commentary on the first trick of the Rig Veda. I'm going to read a part of this because I want you to understand how much Sri Aurobindo had mastery. He's not just talking in the air. So he says this, he wanted to give you the etymology of the word yajna. Yajna is translated as sacrifice, and he tells you, no, the root is different. This particular root, yaj, from which yajna is formed, is a secondary root on the base of the ya constant, the gunas, qualities of which are strength and tenderness applied to action, motion, formation, contact. So this is how you catch the description of a root. The primary roots are ya, yi, yu, with their lengthened forms ya, yi, yu, the original Deva Bhasha, the language of the gods, recognizing only 3 pure vowels, the rest being either modified or mixed vowels. The primary root of yaj, now you've got this combination yaj, is ya, which means essentially to go quietly and persistently, to act or apply oneself quietly and with force and persistence to master knowledge or a thing or person by steady application, to come or bring into contact with gently and loving and effectively, to form, to express clearly. Now when you read these different qualitative feel and you try to hold it together within you, you are automatically pulled into an intuitive state of experience, which is the only state in which you can hold the full sense of the root. Now you notice, if in your learning of the language you were made to dwell on the roots, your mind would tend to get intuitivized naturally by the sheer tendency to want to lean back to the root sense. You see the importance of Sanskrit. And you don't have to consciously try it. It's just inherent to the language itself, the tendency to pull you back to the root sounds and thereby to open you to an intuitive sense of the sound quality power, and thus link you with the intuitive mind. Fascinating. So, and then he is explaining how the senses change, the meaning changes. He links it to Greek, shows you the differences between Greek. I've put the link for those who want to read and explore further. I will skip this, perhaps we'll come back to this another time. But one of the very interesting observations he makes is there is this r sound, which is earlier in the text. He says that this r sound, agnimire, when he explains the etymology, I'm just going to read this because it's interesting. The original root il, to love, embrace, flatter, praise, adore. The cerebral r is a later form, a dialectical peculiarity belonging to some of the dominant races of the Dwapar Yuga, which established itself for a time but could not hold its own, and either resolved itself back into l or was farther transformed into the soft cerebral d, with which it was interchangeable. R, d, r, l. So we have the form id from the Greek, in precisely the same sense, as well as in Sanskrit. So, just showing you the mastery he had, obviously some of it coming from the deeper spiritual vision of the history of humanity also, where he's telling you in the Dwapar Yuga there were dominant races which held this sound and then it fades out. In the modern India, this r sound remains only in the Vedic text because that you cannot remove it, but in the modern languages it stays only in Marathi and Tamil, as far as I know. Even the name Tamil is the r, not Tamil, it's not Tamil, it's Tamil. Marathi and Tamil retain the r sound. Perhaps there are others that I don't know about, but these two actively retain and quite prominently in their vocabulary. So this is one text of Sri Aurobindo which we have looked at, but we will go to something else now which goes even further of how this process happens. And what is the structure of the Varnamala? It's literally the body of language itself, and language as an universal eternal language. So let's look at this now. This text, Sri Aurobindo begins, the language of man is not framed on earth but in heaven, as indeed are all things that the soul uses in this mortal journey. So the moment you come into mortal body, everything that you're using is framed in heaven, not framed on earth. From there it is derived. Everything here is drawn from the heavenly frames. So what is it that makes for the language? By the threefold energy of eternal truth, manifesting force and sustaining delight, everything is created as a type in the world of ideas, the Mahat of the ancients, in the principle of self-manifest and perfectly arranged knowledge. Now he's not just talking about language, but he's talking about everything. But this applies equally to knowledge, to language. So threefold energy of the truth, manifesting force, and the sustaining delight. Every object, every creature, everything that has behind it a real idea has these three things, and the three words you will now recognize represent the Satchidananda. that Satchidananda being the underlying reality, all is born out of Satchidananda, all has the triple, therefore, characteristic of the truth, the manifesting force and the delight of Ananda in it. And the combination of these three make for its distinctiveness. If you look at a horse, for example, or a cow, and we saw the names used for the cow, the combination of these three would then form the word that would be associated naturally in vibrational quality, having the same characteristics by which you would name it. So horse becomes Ashwa, cow becomes Dhenu, as we saw last time, or Gau, depending on. You see how language forms, you see how words are given names. Objects are given names and words. So, the created as a type in the world of ideal. The Mahat of the ancients, in the principle of self-manifest and perfectly arranged knowledge. It is diversely developed by the more discursive but less sure-footed agencies of intellectual mind. So up there in the supramental consciousness, which is the Mahas, is the self-expressive, self-manifesting, perfect arrangement which is natural, innate. Everything knows everything, everything knows itself and everything else in perfect relations. From there, as you move into mind, there is the more discursive and diversely developed process. Imagination hunts after new variations, memory and association corrupt. So you remember a word and an association, and that corrupts the meaning which you have. Imagination wants, oh, I'm fed up with this use, I want to create something new. Analogy perverts. Sensation, emotion, pleasure, sees violent and partial satisfaction. So these are all the distortions which come as the innate underlying truth and its perfect structure, as in Sanskrit, comes down into these levels. Through these levels, all these distortions happen. Hence, change, decay, death, rebirth, the law of the world. Now remember, what he has described here is not just for language. He is going to fundamental principles, so it applies to everything else. The moment there has been a distortion from the perfect alignment and affinity of the supramental, hence change. Because now there is no more perfect alignment. Things have to keep changing to keep up with misalignments. Consequence of change inevitably is things can't keep up with misalignments and therefore decay. Consequence of decay is inevitably death, meaning the form changes so dramatically that you do not recognize it in its original terms anymore. That's death. You understand? Death does not mean something ceases to be. It just changes form so far out that there's no correspondence to the original. But it's still form. Death, which leads inevitably, therefore, to something new is born out of that which ended. So, rebirth. So, you see the sequence. Hence, change, decay, death, rebirth. The law of the world. All this takes place in the descent into the worlds of mind and worlds of matter. Again, all this applies to everything, not just language, but for now we are focused on language. Therefore, mankind has one original language based on certain eternal types of sounds developed by certain laws of rhythmic variation, perfectly harmonious and symmetrical in its structure and evolution. Now you see, because up there it is perfectly harmonious and symmetrical, therefore here it gets represented in this way. And the more you are able to come close to that original, the more this will be true and lasting, real and natural and spontaneous. This is the Deva Bhasha, language of the gods. I am translating poorly, and is spoken in the Satya Yuga. Then it suffers change, detrition, collapse. Innumerable languages, dialects, vernaculars are born. Now comes the mind-blowing statement. The guardians of the sacred language attempt always to bring back the early purity, but even they cannot do it. They reconstruct it from time to time, compromise with the new tendencies, preserve something of the skeleton, lose the flesh, blood, sinew, much of the force and spirit. This reconstructed language they call Sanskrit. All else Prakrit, meaning corrupted. Okay, this statement is one of the most important, the most extraordinary, and we'll dwell on a few aspects of it right now. The rest we will explore a little next time. First, he says there are guardians of the sacred language. What does that even mean? Now, in a very superficial way, you could say there are deities, powers, whose job it is to maintain, to protect, and maybe reconstruct, draw back to the original language. But I'll go a step further. Where do these deities come from? It's not as if the divine says, okay, now I created perfect language, now I'll create deities to protect. No. Inherent to the movement of this vibratory and perfect symmetric expression of sound and power of sound, because they are real ideas, because they're conscious powers, the sounds themselves are powers which are conscious beings. Each sound individually is a deity, but the totality is also a conscious being. It has innate truth, it has force of consciousness, and it has the delight of its expression. It is Satchidananda, isn't it? In an aspect. And I will go so far as to say that is the deity, that is the guardian. Or when you see that in a separate personalized power presence which holds what is true and protects its protecting aspect of force and energy, that you would call the guardian deity of the original Deva Bhasha, language of the gods. So you could look at it as separate, you could look at it as one or aspect of the one. So now comes the interesting thing. They reconstruct, and it's not one, there are many. Why? Because each sound will have its own powers. We will read next time a passage from Kapali Shastriya who tells us about this. And he explains why and how it is wrong to see the sounds as merely sounds. And behind that is the whole principle of the science of mantra. What are those deities and what do they actually carry? What is the force they have, etc. And how they relate to us. So we'll touch upon this now today. When he says they reconstruct it from time to time, compromise with the new tendencies, because you can't help it. Human beings want to go in a certain direction because right now we are going through a certain phase of development. That quality dominates and perverts everything else. So they have to compromise. They can't help it. But when you compromise, what are you willing to lose? You retain that which is most essential. You are willing to lose that which is secondary or tertiary. And now comes this symbol, and it's not merely a metaphor, it is a reality. He says, compromise with the new tendencies, preserve something of the skeleton. Because if that goes, the structure is gone. So you hold the essential structure first. Lose the flesh, blood, sinew. Sinew is muscle. Much of the force and spirit, all that you're willing to lose, but you cling to the skeleton. This reconstructed language they call Sanskrit. All else is distortion, perversion, and prakrit. So what he's saying is the Sanskrit has retained the something of the skeleton. He doesn't even say the whole. Something of the skeleton, but it has lost much of the flesh, blood, sinew, force and spirit. What does this mean? Flesh, blood and sinew? The form, the thing which gives life, and the thing which gives the ability to move, the force. So he summarizes that as much of the force and spirit has been gone. But in the language structure itself, the flesh, blood and sinew are the understanding of how these sounds relate, how they compose, how they combine, and their structuring to form meanings, including the grammar structures. So in the Sanskrit, the word is nirukta, which is the etymology. Imagine, here is a language where the study of the language holds the knowledge of etymology and the importance of etymology implicit to learning the language. So it's as if there is a built-in mechanism for self-purification. But this is part of the flesh, blood, sinew. We'll look at the fullness of this and what was the traditional nature of the Sanskrit language, learning and how it was related to the Veda and why it was considered so important. We'll look at some of that next time because we have too little time today. But I'm going to focus just on this part, which is the skeleton. Now, when you think from the yogic perspective and you picture the skeleton of a human being, what's the first thing that you're reminded of? On the spine are the 7 chakras, isn't it? The moment you see this image, a skeletal structure of a human being seated, immediately the mind fills in, by association, the 7 chakras. And now notice something fascinating. We're going to look at the rest of the... Okay, so now he explains what is this. The backbone of the skeleton is composed of the roots of the original language that survive. So you have a skeleton with structure of arms, even fingers, you have bones, right? But what's the backbone? That's the center of it all. And there you have the chakras. So the backbone is composed of the roots of the original language that survive. The rest is the various principles of word formation. Accordingly, in the languages of the world which are nearest to the old sacred language, the ancient Aryan languages, there is one common element, the roots, the elemental word formations from the roots, and so much of the original significance as survives variety of mental development playing on different lines and to different purposes. And then he says his goal in writing this, the object of this treatise is to provide a reasoned basis built up on the facts of the old languages, Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, German, Celtic, Tamil, Persian, Arabic, for a partial reconstruction, not of the original Deva Bhasha, but of the latest forms commonly original to the variations in these languages. This is Sri Aurobindo's book he is writing. I shall take the 4 languages, Sanskrit, Greek, Latin and Tamil first, to build up my scheme and then supported by the 4 other tongues. He's going to include German, Celtic, Persian and Arabic also to back up, because those have already drifted far enough. If you can get around these 4 which are close enough, the other 3 will be easier, or the other 4 will be easier. Now he's starting to write this book, and of course he restarted writing the book in various ways, and you have those texts, many of the links are there. He did the work for all this, which we discussed last time quite a bit. But I'm going to come back. I don't want to drift from the focus right now. The backbone of the skeleton is composed of the roots of the original language that survive. And we're going to look at this a little bit now. Because if you get your backbone, all the rest flows. You get the focal points of the gradations of consciousness, and from there you can influence the gradations of consciousness, isn't it? That's the rationale for why the tantric system focused on the chakras. And we turn to the tantric system naturally for this knowledge. And we find it, amazingly, in this extraordinary insight. When you look at the chakras with a subtle sight, the chakras are seen as whirling movements, discs, that's why they're called chakra, and chakra means disc. But the discs have petals, or you may say lines. But the lines themselves have as if a turn, so it looks like petals as they move slowly. So if you were to see me, they would normally turn in this way, clockwise to you seeing from the front. So they have, and about this speed, around the third eye, for example, or around the throat, about this speed. They could be slower, sometimes they could be faster, but broadly it is about this speed. But what you see, and if you go closer with the occult eye, you distinguish fine filaments and structures. This is a very important book, which perhaps I will show you some pictures of that next time, which has these drawings done in great detail. And I have from independent authority that I would respect that is one of the most accurate drawings. So one of these independent authorities is Ingo Swan, who recommended that book for the drawings as being the most accurate he had seen. And the second is our friend Mark Oburn, who also confirmed that those were the drawings the most accurate. But the people who did those drawings, and I will share that next time, had the subtle sight very developed, and the kind of details they have gone to is quite exceptional. Very few have been able to do that. But what you see there is that the base chakra, it has 4 petals. The second chakra has 6 petals. The navel has 10 petals. The heart chakra has 12 petals. Interesting. And the throat chakra has 16 petals. The third eye has 2 petals. Sum it all up, you get 50 petals. Interesting coincidence, it matches the number of sounds in the Sanskrit Varnamala. I will, if you permit, I will use the word alphabet interchangeably, though it's not the correct word. So it's not by chance. In fact, in the Tantric tradition, each of these petals is associated with a specific sound. And what is interesting is that these sounds are not arbitrarily mapped, they're actually mapped in sequence. As if the chakras in sequence follow the entire sequence of the Sanskrit sounds, of the Varnamala, of the alphabet. So I've kept a link, I've in fact put 3 links which show you pictures of these. And it's quite a fascinating thing to see. And perhaps for the purpose of record, I will demonstrate, put on the video itself some of these perhaps. Let me see. So there's one very beautiful one which I will place on the map here. Yeah. So I suppose you can all see this. This is the throat chakra. You see how the letters are a, I, U, R, R, A, I, O, Ah. Notice how it goes, and in sequence with the petals of the chakras. In sequence, it's not by chance. This is the throat chakra. If you go now to the next, I have to end the annotation. This is the heart chakra. Ka, kha, ga, gha, na, cha, cha, ja, jha, nya, ta, tha. And it goes into the next. So, na, ta, tha, da, dha, na, pa, pha, ba, bha. And it goes into the next. Ba, bha. You notice, interesting. Ba, bha, ma, ya, ra, la. Of course, the drawings of petals are really bad. It has nothing to do at all with the chakra. It's somebody's fantasy, but I wanted rather the letters because they were easily accessible to the English reader. And then sh, sa, and va. And this is interesting. Remember sh and sa, va and sh, Shiva, Visha, Vasha, Vishnu. They are both rooted in the root chakra, depending on the sequence in which you go. And then the third eye, ksha. Now these are not very good drawings, unfortunately, from the chakra point of view, but I will see if I can. So these are more traditional drawings. If you see here, I've also kept this as a link, so you will see. But unfortunately, there are some ads here. I'm sorry about this. These are more traditional type drawings. Again, they are not correct. This is how the human mind represents these things. So it's not an accurate representation. Next time I will show you images of the actual appearance of the chakra as they appear. But the sounds are placed here. This is on the root chakra. The sounds are placed here, and in the Tantra, they use this as a means of concentration and repetition of the sound to focus on the mantra in order to get specific outcomes. Now, what is fascinating is the spectrum of sounds in the Sanskrit alphabet actually follows in sequence across the vibratory qualities of the petals of the chakras in us. Now, I don't want to mentalize this too much, but try to feel how the natural focal points of energy flow within us and across the subtle body to the physical body is containing these vibratory qualities associated precisely with these deities and sounds of deities, or the creative sounds of the Varnamala, of the language. And each chakra has its combined, so to say, root, deity, sound, image, etc., which are used for visualization, concentration in the Tantric tradition, in order to assist the awakening of that deity, activation of that power, and amplification of its benefits, and so on. Or you dwell on each of these petal sounds to activate those particular sub-qualities and build as if a combined characteristic. Now look at it this way. If across your subtle body or across these centers are all the basic sounds, their combinations now represent the various roots of the language. And where are they located? Along the spine, and combinations across the centers along the spine. There's no other place where they can be. Their combinations are necessarily along the spine. And now we reread what Sri Aurobindo has to say. The backbone of the skeleton is composed of the roots of the original language that survive. Remember, the roots are made of consonants and vowels in combination. Those are the essential roots. So here you have all the consonants and vowels mapped out on those centers. The fact that they're all present and there are resonances among them, but they're all going vertically among each other in their resonances and activation, forming all the possible roots along this column of the spine, forms the spine of the language itself for the body of the language. You see, there's something exceptionally profound here, and I'm not trying to mentalize too much deliberately, but it's as if the language is a body, and it's as if our body has implicit the power of the language of the Sanskrit or the vibratory original sounds of expression of the divine consciousness in creation, and they are rooted in us and they are held in the spinal column. In other words, the activation of the Deva Bhasha is as if an activation of our innate powers in our subtle bodies, so to say, and their expression through our physical form and body and through our physical articulation of language. And notice, the third eye had only two, everything was below, throat down. And recall that it was the throat which has 16 petals, the largest number. So from below upwards you have larger and larger numbers. On the throat is the 16 petals, and from the throat is the beginning of the language articulating itself, flowing out through your mouth. The two petals up are not even directly involved in the primary process of the language. Even their sounds are not primarily involved. Remember, the sounds are hum and shum in this particular drawing. I don't know what they are, but they're not primary. All the others are below the throat. So when you actually speak, think of it in this way. The sense is those vibratory relations which are there presently within you are as if rising from below, forming in and through the throat, which is the most rich, which has the richest 16 combination, and then from here flowing out through the mouth and the lips, tongue, etc. to speak. And that's your bhasha. That's your Deva Bhasha, the divine vibrational speech. And I want you to pause on this experience. Don't mentalize too much. The experience of what this is telling you, or awakening in you, resonating in you, reminding you, as if a deep forgotten memory wakes up. Hold this intuitively in you. In a sense, we are the embodiment of the language itself. In a sense, it is the divine speech speaking out the whole universe and speaking out this microcosm that is us, from our subtle bodies all the way to the most material, because through the chakras we build these links primarily, isn't it? So it's as if the divine sings out, speaks out our being. The heart chakra, interestingly, has 12 petals. Heart and throat among themselves 16 and 12. And one of the statements in the Veda is that all speech emerges from the depth of the heart, arises through the throat, and is articulated through the mind. The throat center, Sri Aurobindo describes as the externalizing mind. Just think about what it means. One could actually dwell on this and perhaps make a whole system and systematize too much and mentalize too much. But I'm going to hold it at this point. Do not systematize too much or mentalize too much. One can build very complex things and make all kinds of theories around it. And maybe they have some truth, but the truth is essentially intuitive. Hold this and recognize the truth of this. This is Deva Bhasha that is innate to our whole being. It is innate to our existence. It is a part of us, or we are a part of it, or there is almost an identity on some deeper level of the truth they represent or we represent in the form that we have embodied. In other words, the human body itself is designed around a deep underlying truth, or a resonance of truth, which is cosmic. So I'm going to reread those lines from Sri Aurobindo. The guardians of the sacred language attempt always to bring back the early purity, but even if they cannot do it, they reconstruct from time to time, compromise with the new tendencies, preserve something of the skeleton, lose the flesh, blood, sinew, much of the force and spirit. This reconstructed language they call Sanskrit, or else Prakrit. The backbone of the skeleton is composed of the roots of the original language that survive. The rest is the various principles of word formation. Catch the roots, the rest is the principles of word formation. That's all. So we'll pause on this point, hold this vision, truth, and I said I promised you two mind-blowing things. Let me then complete with the second one perhaps. This is, I'm reading from the text, I've put a link for it, you can read it later. Swara are 16, that is the vowels. Ardha Swara, Vyanjana are 36, the consonants and half consonants, 16 and 36. Thus composite Varna mala, remember the sounds, composite Varna are 16 into 35 plus 16, because also the vowels can stand on their own, making for 576. This is considered as the fullness, Purnakal. This is the basis of creating the yugas, systems. The Satya Yuga is 3000 Purnakal, which is 3000 multiplied by 576, which is 1,728,000 years. Treta is 3000 minus etc. Dwapara, Kali. All the calculations are derived from this number. Thus the total of all four yugas are 4,320,000 based on the Varna Akshara, the complete set of sounds in their composite. I won't go into detail of the calculation, but just to give you an idea of, suddenly you find this number of sounds mapping to the number of years of the yogas and the entire yoga structure. It's as if this has a connection with the eternal rhythming out of forces, rhythms of unfolding in evolution of the cosmos. And at the same time, it maps into the spinal column of the human being, and I would say even all creatures, all beings, wherever they are. Think about this, it's a very interesting insight. And then we come to Sri Aurobindo's key point, which he had said, the way these things unfold goes by physical laws as well as mental laws, psychological laws of change. And this relates to something physical, of which innately is this truth, which is held perfectly in the divine consciousness, in the Mahas. So again I read from that line where Sri Aurobindo says this in so many words. Every one of its vowels and consonants has a particular and inalienable force which exists by the nature of things and not by development or human choice. These are the fundamental sounds which lie at the basis of the tantric bija mantras, root mantras, and constitute the efficacy of the mantra itself, of those root mantras. Every vowel and every consonant in the original language had certain primary meanings which arose out of this essential Shakti or force. I'm looking for this part where he speaks of the Mahas. Anyway, you remember that part. So this is where we will pause and recognize Sri Aurobindo has a full perspective of this. And now he is trying to convince the rest of us by demonstrating the factual details of his, what he calls his theory, etc. But he already has the full picture. He knows because he has access from top down of the way the language forms. It's actually fascinating in the record of yoga. There are entire passages written in the original Deva Bhasha. And you read it today, you can recognize it's like Sanskrit, but it seems to be something much more ancient, much more fluid. And it takes a while to actually try to get into that. And this is his gift to us. So I'm sure what he has gifted to us will take us quite a while as a humanity even to be able to appreciate. But at least we can recognize that in the process he has released this force of the knowledge, of the higher knowledge into the world. And as he pointed out, that always it is the recovery of this which is the beginning of the recovery of the original language and its power. And that he has initiated for humanity. I don't know how many people it will take, how many generations before this full knowledge is rediscovered, but the work has been established, founded by him. The rest is just for us to follow and build upon. I'm going to pause here. I won't take the questions which are in the chat box. We'll look at that next time. Just hold this concept, hold this experience, what you have received, and let's concentrate on this for a while, recognizing what our current Sanskrit represents, that a reflection or a reduction of a deep truth, and why that is called the language of the gods. Namaste.